All right, welcome back. We're talking about the Minnesota Wild and what their season might look like, their roster, and so on. Questions I have. Starting off, I got these lines off Daily Faceoff. Personally, I don't think this is what we'll see. I think there'll be a little, line mix ups here and there, especially opening night. I don't think we'll see this exact lineup, but something similar. Um, Starting off, you got Kirill Kaprizov, Marco Rossi, and Matt Zuccarello. There you go. You also have Marcus Johansson, final year of his contract, currently has a no movement clause. Joel Eriksson Ek, who I think is one of the best two-way centers in all of hockey. His defensive game is outstanding. I can't state that enough. And you have Matt Boldy as well. Third line, you got Marcus Foligno, Marek Konstantinov, and Ryan Hartman. See, I'm getting better with saying his name. And fourth line, you have Jacob Lauko, who was traded from the Boston Bruins in exchange for Vinny Lettieri. I believe that happened at the draft. Freddie Gaudreau centering that fourth line, and new free agent signing Yakov Trenin, signed 4 years, maybe it's 3 years, at $3.5 million. You also have players Liam Ogren, Riley Height, Samuel Walker, and Travis Boyd, who could also vie for a roster spot in training camp and preseason for opening night. We'll see. I'll get to my thoughts on that in a second. Defense, you have Brodeen Faber, fantastic. Middleton, Spurgeon, also fantastic. Spurgeon looks healthy, looks like he should be back for opening night, for training camp. He should be in training camp. He should be playing in preseason games as well. So that's encouraging for Wild fans. And third line, Declan Chisholm, who was a waiver pickup from the Winnipeg Jets last year, and Zach Bogosian. You also have John Merrill, who will probably be mostly a seventh defenseman this year. Damon Hunt and Jack Peart in the AHL. Goaltending, Philip Gustafson, Marc-Andre Fleury will be back for another year. You also have Jesper Wallstedt, who's there, ready, waiting, chomping at the bit to get some NHL playing time, and rightfully so. You throw out his first game against the Dallas Stars in Dallas, where he was kind of set up for failure, in my opinion, watching that game. You throw that game out, the other two games he played were outstanding at the NHL level. I think this guy is ready. Let's dive into it. Starting off, $756,410 in cap space. That is not enough for a league minimum contract anymore. Right, league minimum is $775 now. They might have an older player or two they can call up at that price range. Just taking a quick glance. No, they do not. They do not. So starting off is, secondly, starting off, the young guys, they need to make an impact this year. We know that. A lot of top prospects finally coming to fruition, breaking into the NHL. My question is open spots. You go out, you sign Yakov Trenin to a decently, probably a bit of an overpaid contract, at least at this time on the surface, right? But that takes a roster spot away from a young guy who probably should see some playing time. Both on offense and defense, there are questions, right? So Marco Rossi, I don't know if he's going to see first line minutes this year. We're probably going to see him on that second line. Matt Zuccarello, I would be surprised to play on that first line. Once he's off of that first line, without Kaprizov, his production plummets. We know he has good chemistry with Kaprizov, but then there's the overpassing thing, and they tend to overpass to each other, giving up, not taking a shot on net and passing up on a decent scoring opportunity. For example, Matt Boldy, very hot, very cold player, looking for more consistency this year. He knows that's what he has to work on, so we'll see that. I'm more apt to see Eriksson Ek on that first line between Kaprizov and Zuccarello, Rossi on that second line between Boldy and Marcus Johansson. Producing well under what you want a player to produce at for a third line player, right? Well under a half point per game with second line minutes, stable to that second line all last year. He is in a contract year, but at the same time, I'm not quite sure why Minnesota Wild management is so set on the idea of Johansson playing second line minutes, especially when he's a career third liner. Um, Marcus Foligno, Konstantinov, and Hartman on that third line, I think makes sense. Lauko, Gaudreau, Trenin. I'd say the next guy in would be Liam Ogren, so I'd say he makes the team. Um, but Liam Ogren, he scored 2 points in 4 games last year. Power forward, played pretty well, especially for a young player. He should be an NHL regular at this point this year, but considering the lack of roster spots, what do you do with Liam Ogren? Do you send him back to Sweden, kind of further his development there, or do you make a spot for him? I could see him slotting into that fourth line, maybe that second line for Johansson, depending on how hot he comes out of the gate. I don't know. Lauko, no stranger to being a healthy scratch and playing fourth line minutes. Good, solid fourth line grinder player. A lot of heart, a lot of energy from that guy. Then you get Riley Heidt, who had this incredible season in juniors in Canada last year. Looked the beginning of last season at Wild training camp, looked to be pretty solid both offensively and defensively. I thought he was a dark horse to make a roster spot last year, but given the amount of open roster spots, he didn't make it. This is a player I would not like to see go back to juniors at this point. I think his development should continue at the NHL level. I think his defense last year was solid, but it grew substantially throughout this past season in juniors, and his offense took that extra step. His goal scoring specifically jumped quite a bit, which was very nice to see. Those are two players I would love to see on the roster, and given the roster makeup, I'm not quite sure where you slot those two players in on a regular basis, right? So that's kind of the issue I'm beginning to have with the general manager, Bill Guerin. He likes to fill up all these roster spots with veterans. You're not going to take Trenin out. You just signed him to a pretty hefty contract, right? You're glued to Marcus Johansson on that second line. You have guys who deserve to be on the roster as well. Foligno, Konstantinov, Hartman, I think all deserve an opportunity. Konstantinov, excellent two-way centerman. Very good defensively as well. Freddie Gaudreau might not see playing time. I could see Yakov Trenin centering that fourth line, but we'll see. Freddie Gaudreau, we know, was hurt all last year and has played well in the prior 2 seasons leading up to this past season. So we could see Freddie Gaudreau start better out of the gate. Honestly, not a bad centerman, right? Not a bad fourth line centerman. You have good fourth line options. You just need to find the right fit and who should get fourth line minutes and who should really see top 9, top 6 minutes. I'd make an argument that Riley Heidt and Liam Ogren both really should be seeing top 9 minutes at the very least. And that's just my thought. Now, Riley Heidt being a center, you have 3 strong centers, and you have Trenin, Gaudreau as well, who can play that center position. Boldy technically, but probably not. Right? So it's going to be a lot harder for Riley Heidt to break into this roster. I don't know where you go from there. Maybe you start him out as that fourth line center and with not a whole lot of opportunity to move up and grow. What do you do? Do you move Konstantinov off to the side? You kind of have to wait for an injury to happen. And, with certain players on this roster, injuries are probably going to happen. Some of these players are injury prone. But that being said, that could happen 20, 30 games into the season, and all of a sudden you have these players only getting a half season of NHL development and sitting on the bench for the other half, right? And that's not what you want for your young players, especially to get acclimated to an NHL schedule. Whew. You also have Sammy Walker. Sammy Walker has been trying to break in for a few years now. Excellent at the AHL level. Hasn't quite put it together at the NHL level. I don't think he's played poorly. He's been getting very limited opportunity at the NHL level to succeed, and some of his line mates, not the best when it comes to offensively producing at the NHL level when he's played in a Minnesota Wild uniform. So I don't know if I wouldn't say he's necessarily gotten a fair shot at getting an NHL job, but this is a guy I would like to see given some type of opportunity. He's, how old is he? I'm not even on his thing. I need a breath anyway. Where is he? Sammy Walker. Oh, there he is, all the way down. He's 25. He's a restricted free agent at the end of this year with arbitration rights. We'll see. That could bring about a one-way type contract. If he's isn't given many opportunities in the NHL again. Travis Boyd, also a veteran centerman coming in from Arizona/Utah as an unrestricted free agent. Moving on to defense, though, I think your top four is great, right? You have Middleton Spurgeon as really your second pairing, and we'll see how the minutes are split up. But Middleton Spurgeon was your top pairing just a couple seasons ago. And last season, Faber really emerged as a number one defenseman. Brodin, one of the best defensemen in the entire NHL for several years. Both guys are fantastic. And if you have two first line defensive pairings, that's fantastic. You're already set up for success there. Moving on to the third line, you got Declan Chisholm, young kid. I liked what he showed in his limited time in a Minnesota Wild uniform. Some games were very good. Some games, bit of a question mark, right? You can still see he's a young kid developing at the NHL level. But I think he should continue to get those reps and opportunities in the lineup moving forward. Zach Bogosian, veteran, big physical defenseman, right? Not going to wow you on the offensive score sheet, but he showed last year he'll drive up into the zone and create a scoring chance once in a while, which is fun to see. But Bogosian really has taken a lot of pride last year in starting to develop these younger defensemen, kind of take some of these guys under his wing, show them the ropes and so on, which is nice. A bit of leadership on that back end as well. Spurgeon's also the captain. John Merrill is what it is. Damon Hunt, though, I'd like to see get more of an opportunity. I liked him when he was in a Wild uniform. I thought he was pretty solid in his own zone for the most part. Young, but Wild management wanted to see him score a little more. Probably should have, they had. I remember he came up last year, and it was a lengthy stretch. They were banging out games like every other night, 3 games in 5 nights type thing. And by the end, Damon Hunt was gassed, which is fair. But I think that was an opportunity to make him a healthy scratch, put him in for the next game, see how he does. I think there was a little more workability you could have done with that situation at that time with Damon Hunt. That didn't necessarily happen. We also had Jack Peart, came out of the NCAA this past year. Looks to be very promising on defense, but at the same time, still young. I'd kind of be surprised if Peart made it into the NHL roster. There's a few other guys on defense as well. I think these two guys have the best shot of making the roster. I don't think either of these guys will. I think your top 7 is set. Nonetheless, you do have Kyle Masters, who I like a lot. I really liked him in the Memorial Cup when I saw him play. Carson Lambos, I think, still needs to work on his defense. His offensive game is coming around. It's that defensive game needs a little bit of work, which is fine. He's 21, former first round pick. You have David Spacek, who's developing. Ryan O'Rourke, who's taken a little longer to develop than we anticipated. More of a defensive defenseman. Working on that defense a little bit. I like Ryan O'Rourke. I hope he continues to develop and comes along. And I think that's really it for NHL ready players. You have Cameron Crotty and Joe Ciccone. I don't even know how to say his name. I'm not gonna lie. Ciccone, maybe. I'm gonna go with Ciccone. Looks Italian. CH instead of C. I'm gonna go with Ciccone, but we'll see with that. Goaltending, Gustafsson, Fleury. Fleury, I think what you saw last year is about what you can expect this year. He had some pretty rough games, and then he finished the season strong. I wouldn't say it'd be as up and down as it was for Fleury last year. I'd say it'd be a little more consistent, but when you're talking about save percentage, I think you can look at something around like a 906, right? Maybe like a 30 games played, maybe 35, depending on how the season progresses. Philip Gustafsson, I expect a big bounce back season. this is a stronger defensive core than last year, which we know helps goaltenders and their numbers. And I think this this forward group will be a little more adept to playing team defense than they were in some points last year. I think a lot of these young guys still learning how to play team defense at an NHL level. It's not easy. It's difficult. You have to know your role and responsibility. There's a lot more thinking that happens throughout the game than maybe at a junior level, right? Where your positioning is where you need to be in order to be able to get back and succeed. I'd expect the defense in front of the goaltenders to be better, and as a result, I think Gustafsson will have a bit of a bounce back here. I don't think he's going to put up a .930 save percentage, but, and obviously we'll see how his conditioning is once we come into training camp, because I don't have any insight to that right now. I know it's been a concern from the Minnesota Wild staff the past 2 years now, so we'll see. Wall set, though, I wouldn't be surprised if the Wild carry 3 goaltenders. I don't think Gustafsson's really worth much, and I think the upside is there. So maybe they give him a workload in the beginning, get him a little, bump up his stats, make him a little more marketable to a team that might be interested, that are having issues early on with their goaltending. Fleury, he's going to be a Minnesota Wild throughout this year unless he wants to retire as a Penguin or a Montreal Canadian or whatever you have, right? Probably not a Golden Knight. But Wallstedt, nonetheless, should see playing time this year. I'd be utterly shocked if he didn't. But this is a team where there's a lot of roster spots. A lot of the spots are pretty much set, which makes it tough for these young guys to come in and at least prove that they can play at an NHL level. And I think some of these guys will surprise some people. Really, Riley Heidt. I'm really high on Riley Heidt. I think this guy could come in and be an effective, at the very least, third-line centerman. I think we could expect him to put up some points, but also play responsible defense. Question with Riley Heidt, as is with every single young centerman that comes into the NHL, will be that face-off percentage. It's an adjustment, and it takes players a few years to really get up to an NHL level where they're hitting 45 to 50% on the face-off dot, if not more. We saw that from Marco Rossi last year. We saw that from Connor Bedard last year, for example. I think Bedard was in the 30s, and Rossi was either high 30s or low 40s. I'm not 100% sure. But we see that progression. Both Bedard and Rossi should improve their face-off percentages this upcoming season. Keep in mind, Rossi spent a lot of his time on the second line, had some first-line minutes as well. Bedard was a first-line center. Both these guys are taking face-offs against some of the best face-off guys in the NHL. Bedard a little more than Marco Rossi, but at the same time, that's tough for an 18 or 20, 21-year-old kid to go up against like a Sidney Crosby or Connor McDavid in the face-off dot for 60 minutes a night. It's tough. With that being said, the last thing, we talked about 3 of these 4 bullets. I want to talk about Spurgeon and his return. Spurgeon had hip surgery, I believe, which is tough to come back from, doable. Spurgeon's also an aging player, right? He's 34. I can also check that right now. Look at this. He's 34, right shot defenseman, signed for the next 3 years, full modified no trade clause. So it's a 10-team no trade list this year, next year, and his final year. And then he's a UFA at the age of 37. So we'll see. Spurgeon, short guy, listed as 5'9". I've heard reports where he's 5'7". I don't think he's that short. Nonetheless, takes a beating on that back end. Very good with finesse style defense. Can produce some offense. He's not going to wow you offensively, but at the same time, can quarterback a power play. Is very, very solid in his own defensive zone. Can do a lot of things right. This guy has received Norris votes many, many years. Right? He's one of the best defensemen in the league, with Spurgeon and Faber both on that right side. That's a strong. Those are 2 strong players right there. So we'll see if Spurgeon can come back at like say 80% of what he was. That's still good enough to be a second line, a solid second line defensive pairing. You can kind of let Middleton go up and get lost in that offensive zone and have that reliance of Spurgeon on your back end. Right, and that was the same with Brodin when he was paired with Dumba. Dumba would go up, kind of do his thing in the offensive zone, and Brodin would be there as a security blanket to cover up any mistakes. And Spurgeon was very good at that as well. Middleton, pretty solid defensive defenseman. At the same time, this is a team that wants to encourage their defensemen to drive up to the offensive zone and produce offense, which leaves holes on their back end. You can get away with that with a guy like Brodin, but last year, when it came to Middleton trying to drive up into that zone, it was a little iffy, right? And when I say you can get away with that with Brodin, because Brodin's back on your defensive end, just making magic happen in his own zone. The dude is incredible to watch. That's all I got for this board. So I still have to I got to go through every team in the NHL. I don't know if I'll do a video for every team. Probably not. But my projection for the Wild is they'll be a fringe playoff team. I haven't really worked out the standings just yet, or my standings projections for this upcoming year. They may or may not be in the wild card position for my standings. I'm not sure yet. I think this is definitely a fringe team. I think it depends a lot on how these younger players produce offensively. If you can get a Liam Ogren in on that second line, and he puts up, 45, 50 points while providing solid power forward and defensively oriented hockey on a line with Rossi and Boldy, who can produce offensively. You have Eriksson Ek on that first line, Kaprizov being a superstar, Zuccarello putting up 65, maybe 70 points because he's paired with Kaprizov. I think you have a strong top six right there, and I think your third line's pretty solid, right? And you have pieces on your fourth line that can be big, can be finesse, physical, speed-oriented. You have options for your fourth line. So I think their forward structure is pretty solid, but there are question marks that need to be answered, right? And I think their defense overall is great. Their defensive core is, I think, upper echelon in the NHL. I think they might have the best top four of any team, in my opinion. I know that's a very controversial thing to say, but you have a first line, not this past year, but the year before, and you have the first line from last year, both capable of playing at an elite level. And I'm really mostly talking about defense here. I'm not talking about offensive defensemen or offensively oriented defensive cores, where we see a lot of those around the NHL as well. I'm talking about defense in their own zone, defense. I think this is a formidable core right here. John Merrill, we know if he's not an everyday guy, he can come in, play pretty well on a third pairing. He's not going to revolutionize the defense. He's not going to all of a sudden be a second pairing guy out of nowhere, right? You know what you're going to get with John Merrill. He's a great guy. I'd like to see some of these younger guys get in. This is again fringe playoff team. I don't think this is the year you should be pushing for the playoffs. I think this is the year you should be bringing in these young guys, developing them, and make a push for next year. When you get more cap space, the cap will go up. You get 14, well, it's 14.7, but you still have to pay like 1.6. You get like $13 million in cap space off the books, which is great. So you can go out, you can sign somebody if you want. Excuse me. You can make a big trade, a big splash, right? In the trade market, but at this time, I don't really see. I guess I understand the urgency and rush from a general manager standpoint. You don't know if this year is going to be your last year, right? Same with the coach. You want to push for the playoffs. Excuse me. Could be fired at any time, but from an organizational standpoint, this should be the epitome of a transition year. You're bringing in new guys. You're kind of doing a bit of a retool-ish. An internal retool, as I like to say, and you're building for something next year. You're building for a sustainable chance to win a Stanley Cup. Whereas this year, you push, maybe you get in as a wildcard team and you get eliminated in the first round. That's more often than not what happens if you make the playoffs as a wild card team, right? And then you're kind of rinse and repeating next year, right? You still have some of these players filled in. Marcus Johansson likely gone, but a lot of these players, John Merrill probably gone. I don't think there are many free agents next year. You have 4 RFAs, one being Jacob Lauko. You might have Chisholm, depending on how many games he plays this year, might be a UFA. But for the most part, you're going to rinse and repeat for next year. So you need to kind of start finding a way to incorporate these young guys anyway, get them developing time. So next year, when you have money and you can make a splash, you can really push for something more sustainable than being a fringe playoff team. So that's it. That's my little rant. That's the Minnesota Wild in a nutshell this year. For the Wild organization, the fans, I'd almost like them to take a bit of a step back this year, maybe miss the playoffs again, and work these young guys into the roster. And I'm just repeating myself, but push for something next year, right? I just, I don't know. I think if you're going to have a transition year, this is the best time. I think it was the best time maybe last year or even the year before that when you had those massive cap hits from the Parise Suter buyouts. But this is the last year, and you're getting some of these young guys into your roster. I think this is the time where you gotta bring those guys in. You gotta see what they can do, and you know what you have going into next year. And maybe some of these guys don't work out at an NHL level, and you can trade them for something rather than just going into next year blind and having like a Kaprizov go down and having like a Liam Ogren fill in on that first line, and all of a sudden Liam Ogren isn't what you expected him to be. I think he'll be fine, but nonetheless, you want to know what you have if you're going to make a push for the playoffs. So that's all I got. I appreciate you. Take care, all right?